This barrel is now done, and I can move on to work on the second. To work on the second barrel, I'll first move this one out of the way so that I have my grid currently visible. Let's go take a look at the second mesh we're going to be modeling. Mesh number 2 is the wooden barrel. Now, for the sake of simplification, we're going to assume that the dimensions of the wooden barrel match those of the oil barrel, meaning we are going to be using a height of 90 centimeters and a radius of 30 centimeters, or a diameter of 30 centimeters. This simplifies things quite a bit. Back in Max, I'll return to the creation panel. I'll return my cylinder preset, and I will click and drag out a footprint of a cylinder, drag up to create its height. Then I'll go and enter the values that I've predetermined. 30 for the radius and 90 for the height. Since the wooden barrel does not contain ribs like the oil drum, but contains metal bands instead, we'll need to alter the number of height segments. Here, I'll probably go in and add one edge for each metal height band section that I can see. In doing so, we'll be able to count how many edges we're going to need all along the edge of our cylinder. The other thing that is worth noting is that the barrel is curved, meaning we're going to need a few extra edges here in the center in order to preserve that curve. Without this, the barrel will be perfectly flat down the center and will not resemble the image. If I were to go and count exactly how many edges that means we need, I can use 1 at the bottom of the first band, 2 and 3 for the next band, 4 and 5 for the next, 6, 7, 8 for the gap in the middle, 9 and 10, 11 and 12, and 13. Back in Max, I'll go into my height segments and I'll change the 3 to a 13. 3ds Max creates height segments at even intervals along the length of the object or the height of the object. This is not the correct layout or as they appear on the reference image, so they will need to be edited. We'll also run with 1 cap segment and 18 sides. This too will allow us to model the rest of the barrel. Again, I will return to my modifier panel and I'll convert my cylinder to an editable poly. Once here, we need to position our edges in a way that matches the reference image, spacing them equally. For this, I will simply be using the Edge tool in order to double-click my selections, followed by holding Control and selecting my edges. This will convert my selection from the edges I had selected to every vertex that lies along those edges. The reason this is important is that should I try to scale my edges, being that they are 2 separate edge loops, they won't scale. Each edge loop is already perfectly flat and scaling won't affect them. Vertex selection, however, works in a little bit of a different way. Here, the vertices are not part of 2 independent collections, but part of one larger collection, so that if I were to scale them along Z, they will actually scale the entire selection. This allows us to move the vertices on the top up and the vertices on the bottom down. So here, I'll simply move the vertices up, giving us a little bit of a gap here for our first metal band. Again, I'll return to my edge selection, and I'll double-click on the next band. Holding Control, I'll double-click on the next band below. Once again, holding Control, I'll select on the vertex selection type, converting my selection. Now again, using the scale in Z, I'll move these things a little bit closer together, giving us our smaller wooden gap. I'll select the next edge loop. Holding Control, I'll add the next edge loop. Again, holding Control, I'll select vertices. Using the scale tool, I'll move these a little bit closer together, giving us our second metal band. As it turns out, most of the spacing in the next set of edges all looks to be about accurate to me. So at this point, I can stop manipulating the position of the edges. The next thing that I need to do is I need to add the curvature to the barrel. Now, the reason I would add the curvature to the barrel next is that this is arguably the largest detail that needs modeling. The bands, the little wooden plug, even the details in the cap are all smaller details, and as with most art, starting with a larger, bulkier detail is a much easier way to proceed. Here, I'll start by creating the bulge. The way that I'm going to use is by using a modifier called FFD cylinder. This is it here. FFD stands for freeform deformation. In this case, the cylinder refers to the shape of the cage around my model. The cage is not cylindrical because my model is. The cage is cylindrical because the modifier is determining it should be. Here, I don't have the right number of points, and if I look at my barrel from above, it's no longer perfectly round. This is due to the fact that there are 6 evenly spaced rows of vertices on the freeform deformation modifier. Because of this, I'm going to go into the set number of points and reconfigure the cage. Here, the number of sides is how many sides around our modifier's cage will have. I'll bring this to 18. This will match the number of sides on our barrel. Radially, I don't need any edges, so I'll just bring this to 2. Finally, the height segments. With the height segments, I'm going to reduce this to 3. The end result is a cage that has a vertex for every vertex on my mesh, and along its height has the third group right down the center. The way that this modifier works is that if we select it, it allows us to then select the vertices in the modifier and scale them to our liking. Here, the cage is dragging along the mesh with it, in this case, with a very nice amount of fall off. So, I'll scale this up until the curvature matches that of the barrel. When I'm pleased with the end result, I'll right-click on my modifier and I'll collapse it. This accepts the changes that I've made to the mesh and allows me to continue moving and modeling into the Edit Poly mode. Here, I'll go and start working on the cap. Unlike the oil drum, this cap has a tiny little bevel, or an inset, a bevel that drops down at an angle, and an extrusion that runs down. All tools that we've played with already. I'll select one cap, and holding Control, I'll select the other. Next, I'll inset. Here, we only need a small amount. I'll do 0.1. Next, we need our bevel dropping down at an angle. So in the Edit Polygon section, I'll find the bevel, choose the settings. Before I begin, I'll zero out my settings so I can keep an eye on what's happening. First, I'll use the height to drop it down, and second, I'll use the outline to bring it in, giving us our down at an angle. I'll hit the green check mark to continue and continue modeling. Next, I'll use the extrude option with a negative value to drop the cap down again. Here, I'll hit the green check mark to continue modeling. Next, we'll add the metal bands. This is done by selecting one polygon that belongs to the group of polygons that will become the metal bands, and then holding Shift, clicking on its neighbor. Shift will continue the selection around in a loop. I can now hold Control to select the next metal band, and Shift to select its neighbor, continuing its loop all the way around. Continuing this trend, I can go all the way down the barrel, selecting each independent loop that will become one of the barrel's metal bands. With each of these bands selected, I'll go and find the extrude settings option, and you'll notice that the extrude is not working in the way that we would like it to. This is because, just like bevel in the previous barrel, there are 3 settings for our extrusion. The default is by group. Once again, we would like to use local normal. Here, the metal bands are now extruding out along the direction that they are facing. These metal bands are too large, so I will zero out the number, then getting close with my camera, and I'll push them out until they look to be about right. Hitting the green check mark, I'll accept my changes and close the tool. I now have the metal bands created for the barrel. The last element that requires modeling is the little wooden cap that lives in the front of the barrel. Now, when we made the cap for the oil drum, we were starting with a circular surface. So, insetting and extruding would create a circular surface. However, currently, on our wooden barrel, we are not starting with a circular surface. This means that if we were to inset and extrude, we would end up with a square cap. Since that is not the way that this appears in the image, we'll have to create this cap separately. I'll hit front on my viewport, and zooming in, I'll go and create the cap. First, go to my creation menu, and again, I'll go and find the cylinder. I'll click on it, and it remembered our settings from the previous cylinder we created. These ones were for the wooden barrel. Here, I'll remove all the height segments, since they are not required for the cap. Also, the number of sides is set to 18, which is the number of sides our barrel has. Since this is a smaller detail, a smaller number here will suit us just fine. I'll change it to 10. Over beside the barrel, I'll click and draw, creating this cylinder about the size that I would like it to be. If I hit P to return to my keyboard and to return to my perspective view, I can see that this has created a little small cylinder for us. I'll hit T on the keyboard to go to my top view, W to use the move tool, and then I'll just go move this thing so that it fits on the barrel about where it should be. Somewhere about here looks about right. Next, I'll select my barrel. In its modifier panel, without any sub-selection type turned on, I can find the attach button. Toggling this, I can then go click on the cap to attach it to the barrel. I can then turn off the attach tool. Now, the entirety of the barrel is a single object. That looks like it. Let's go through the grading criteria. Number 1, n-gons. Again, n-gons are polygons that contain more than 4 sides. I know there are several on this. Let's take a look at finding them. Again, in the Ribbon Modeling Toolkit, I'll find the tab called Selection, and all the way at the right, I'll find the greater than 4. Here, I'll hit the little pointer, and we'll find that there are 4 n-gons. These are the top and bottom of the cylinder, and the front and inside the back of the little cap that was made. Again, in this scenario, all n-gons happen to be circular. This means that all we need to do to fix them is to inset, accept, followed by collapse. This creates triangles where once there was an n-gon. Again, to be certain that I haven't missed any, I'll once again go to my binumeric selection type and click the pointer to ensure that there are no n-gons selected. Grading criteria number 2 is to ensure that our object is properly named. Here, cylinder 001 is currently the name of this object. Again, I'll name it wooden barrel. And now, this mesh has a name as well. Lastly, the details. The details here are fairly simple. I need to make sure that there are 6 metal bands, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that there is some room on the cap. Here, we're going to have an inset, a bevel, and an extrusion. Now, if you look carefully at what's happening here, there's actually an extra edge that has been created. This extra edge was created from the fact that we inset to make the top, but we extruded to make the metal band. This edge is where originally the side of the barrel was. Since this edge is no longer needed, I'll hold Control and hit backspace to remove it and the vertices that belong to it. This extra edge also belongs in the bottom, or is currently on the bottom. So again, I'll double select it, Control, backspace to remove it and its vertices. Let's take a look at the details on the lid. We need an inset, a bevel, and an extrusion. All 3 are present here. We need our little cap, and we also need to ensure that the barrel is rounded. Once completed, all that's required is to save your file. In this case, going to the Max icon, using the drop-down to go to Save As, and then making sure that we're saving this as a Max 2016 file. Since my version of Max is 2016, the default is 2016 for me. If your version of Max is above 2016, please save it back down to 2016. Here, I'll save it on my desktop. This will be called last name, in this case my last name, dot first name, dot barrels. And just like that, the assignment is done. Thanks for watching, and I hope this helps.